for coming by. We have a plastic bag full of stuff, which we brought to show you all. But first of all, we may as well get started.
So we've called our talk Enabling Play, and I guess that's for a few different reasons. Our work at Vivid is really about interaction and about play, but also we had to do a lot of experimentation to actually get to the end result. So I'm Liam Ryan. I'm an industrial designer.
I'm Frank, industrial and interaction designer as well.
I'm Jason. Obviously, my background is architecture. So Liam and I work for a company called Arup, whose first Sydney project was the structural engineering of the building that we're standing in. So you're welcome. And Liam and I are lucky enough to get the chance to work with Frank on this project. So that's our artwork. It's called Social Firefly. If none of you have had a chance to actually go see it, I highly recommend it because, like what's been said earlier tonight, super beyond super cool. The work itself has to be experienced to understand how it works.
Yeah, we've been trying to take photos of it all week and failed miserably.
So we'll leave it up there for a while because this one came out okay. But essentially, we'll go through the artwork in a little bit. So what we wanted to do today was not just talk specifically about this project and why we think it's great, but talk a little bit about the process of making it, what we went through in terms of playing with the material, playing with the idea, playing with the concept, playing in a group, in a team dynamic, and taking that dynamic and producing something like the Fireflies. We may as well bring them out.
Yep.
Plastic bag.
So we'll start with actually the finished product because that's what's on top.
So over in the other side of the harbour, we've got 48 of these sitting in a tree, and they all have a series of light sensors on the body. They have a light, they have two arms that move themselves around in that direction and in this direction, and they also have a motor and a wing, so they buzz that whenever they get excited. And the idea behind the project really is a combination of social interaction and the emergent behavior that comes from social interaction. So you get a number of like-minded things with the same means of communication and see what happens.
So these individual cells each have the same ways of communicating, the same methods of listening, and they have to sort of abide by the same rules. But when you turn them on, when you first see them turn on at 6 o'clock, they all do exactly the same thing. But then after a few moments, they start to develop their own sort of personalities, and depending on what's going on around them, they react in different ways.
Get into that.
Yeah.
Shut up and tell them already. So Vivid, I think, listening to Ignatius Jones describe what the festival is about really speaks to some of the reasons why we got involved in the project in the first place. Thinking about how light is an expression of an idea and how you can communicate things through light. And we really grabbed on that idea when working on our project and thinking about how we can use this really simple medium, just pulses of light, to communicate in a really sophisticated manner, and not just within the Fireflies themselves, but through to the people that are there interacting with them, and vice versa.
So I guess these are some images that were sort of our inspiration behind the project itself. Frank and Jason have already touched on the ideas of the kind of clones that somehow behave differently because of their interaction with each other. But also, we wanted to use some pretty advanced technology. We're all pretty avid fans of what's happening in the world in terms of manufacturing, and in terms of open source software and open source kind of circuitry and microcontrollers. So we kind of wanted to bring all those components together.
There is a nice kind of undercurrent to the work that we've done in terms of how it is built upon. It's a community that we've created that could only have been created through the community like the Arduino open source community or the processing software open source community. So there is I only just thought of that then, but I think that that's actually a really nice metaphor. Something that we didn't mention which is worth mentioning, is that one of the ideas that went into the project was thinking about how local interactions between neighbours can influence the behaviour of a whole. So if we think of the fireflies as an example in nature, if one firefly is pulsing at a particular rate and another firefly is pulsing at a different rate, through interactions with their neighbours, fireflies the group can tend to pulse at the same rate, even though there's no one firefly saying, this is the rate I think we should be pulsing at. And that only happens through local interaction building up an emergent behaviour, which we think is just amazing. It took us a while to get here.
Yeah, we did actually do a lot of experimentation. Although we had the idea of the wings very early on, because we had fireflies and they have wings, we'd originally thought about it as a fluttering wing, so it's a visual cue, not really thinking about sound at all. But when we actually started playing around with motors and counterweights and lightweight material like paper or I don't know what that is, polycarbonate, I guess, we noticed the sound was actually much more interesting and much more apparent from really far distances. So that's, I guess, one example of just stuffing around that really led us towards the final result that we're really happy with.
Yeah, I'd love to press play on the video here, but I think what's really important in this process is like what was mentioned earlier, trying things out with material, experimenting with a different interaction between the arm and that wing, and experimenting with a different material for the wing itself. All of these lead to a more informed process for the fireflies as a whole. We spent a lot of time interacting with lights, building really, really small rigs that were essentially just a light sensor, an arm to move the light, and a light itself. And shining really, really old torches onto light sensors to see if they would actually work. Because we were paranoid, we didn't know if these awesome Philips lights that we had to work with would be bright enough to shine through across the tree and influence a firefly sitting, some meters away. So we tried it out with a really, really dodgy old 10-year-old light, shining it on a light sensor and watching it move back and forth. And so once you've established that works, you can start to introduce sophisticated movement. So does the light move immediately when it gets light on it, or does it move slowly and then quicker and then slowly again? And trying to introduce a little bit more of an organic movement to the movement of the fireflies. And it has two axes of movement as well, so it doesn't just do this, but it does that whilst turning around at the same time. I'm probably not dexterous enough to demonstrate that, but they're really cool. Yeah, we're also really talented at doing things like electronic circuitry.
So one thing we might not have mentioned before is that they're all individually controlled. They're all autonomous. There's no central box somewhere telling all of the fireflies how to react to things. It's all happening within that shell. They've all got their own brain.
This is like maybe a middle level prototype, isn't it? Yeah, from that to that. So this is not the first one, but probably about the fifth or so. So, in order to get to that, where it's all encased in one package, we had to have, the components which are stuck to a rafter in my shed, and then, this model was made in CAD and then 3D printed. So just to get the right, test the shapes out, and then there was also a model made for this top part, which is that there. And the great thing about the 3D printing is that you can make it, test it. We had different ideas. We could modify as we go, without having to wait, months between each change. And the shape of the internal components. We could see that we didn't want this to be so square anymore. We wanted to really integrate between the shell and what's inside and what's outside.
Yeah, just on the internal structure as well. I mean, that wasn't straightforward either. I mean, we went through 15 iterations of the plywood as well. We were changing it at one point once every day, just tweaking it to make it work well.
Really stressing our laser cut guy out. Yeah. I think it's pretty safe to say that it has been an evolutionary process over time. So we started out with this sketch and a whiteboard full of words that meant a lot to us about the project, and thought about how those things would impact and translate into the finished form.
So spent a lot of time in a basement, effectively, at UTS, just stuffing around with the prototypes we'd made up until a certain point. Because this project was really short in terms of developing a product from scratch, I think it was around 8 weeks. We effectively had to do it in 2 different stages. We had to build the physical thing, but then figure out all of the smarts behind it in a separate stream. Does that make sense? So there were kind of 2 creative processes going on at once.
It's not anywhere near as fun as it looks. I think we should probably just mention this before we wrap up, but we spent a lot of time thinking about how the fireflies think and remember and interact with their neighbours. So they have energy levels, they have a history, so they know how bright it's been before as to how bright it is right now, and they take all of this into account when making a decision: do I dance or not? Yeah. So we're really proud of it. It's just on the other side of Circular Quay. It's in a massive fig tree between the MCA and the Overseas Passenger Terminal. Its backdrop is the awesome projection on the Opera House by Superbienne. Go have a look and play with them. We've got torches there, so you can go set them off and start them dancing.